That night, I slipped my key into the lock, still carrying the warmth of laughter from my friend's house. I expected nothing more than silence inside. Maybe the soft hum of the fridge, maybe Carl asleep upstairs. But instead, I heard it. Whispers. Laughter. That playful tone I hadn't heard from him in years. My heart thudded as I stepped closer to the living room, and in a single heartbeat, my entire world collapsed. On our couch, the one we had chosen together when we first dreamed of a home, Carl was tangled up with another woman, kissing her like I'd never existed. The sight stole the air from my lungs, leaving me frozen in place. My body trembled as I struggled to form words. Somehow I forced out a demand for an explanation, my voice breaking under the weight of betrayal. Carl didn't stutter, didn't show even a flicker of shame. He leaned back, that arrogant smirk carved across his face, and said the words that cut deeper than the scene in front of me. The explanation is simple. You can't leave me. You have nothing. I'll live life however I want. Each word pierced through me, sharper than glass, and in that moment, I realized the man I thought I knew had never truly been mine. I stood there, shaking, trying to process the cruelty that had just spilled from his mouth. It wasn't just the kiss, it was the way he looked at me, like I was disposable, like my years beside him meant nothing. My throat tightened, and I felt the sting of tears threatening to fall. But I refused to let him see me crumble right there, not when he was basking in his own arrogance. I grabbed the nearest bag I could find, stuffing it with whatever clothes my hands touched. My movements were frantic, clumsy, fueled by heartbreak and fury colliding inside me. Carl didn't move. He didn't stop me. He just sat there with her, watching me unravel as if my pain was a show made for his amusement. That silence from him, it screamed louder than any insult ever could. When I finally walked out, the night air hit me like ice. I drove straight to my friend's place, my vision blurred with tears. Each mile away from that house felt both like freedom and like a funeral. I collapsed into her arms the moment I arrived, the words tumbling out of me in broken pieces. And while she held me, one thought echoed in my mind. This wasn't the end. Somehow I knew I'd be back in that house, and not just to collect my clothes. Sleep barely touched me that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them on that couch, his lips pressed to hers, his words echoing like poison in my ears. I felt stripped, hollowed out, like he had taken every ounce of dignity I had left. My friend tried to comfort me, but even her gentle words couldn't drown out the humiliation burning inside me. By morning, the raw ache had shifted into something else. Resolve. I knew I couldn't stay curled up on that couch forever, hiding from the wreckage of my marriage. I needed to face it, to collect more of my things, to remind myself that my life wasn't confined to the shadow of his cruelty. My hands shook as I grabbed my keys, but I forced myself out the door. When I stepped back into the house, silence greeted me this time. Carl was at work, but something unexpected caught my eye, a small object left behind on the coffee table, a wallet. I picked it up, curiosity prickling through the numbness, and when I flipped it open, my breath caught. The face staring back at me wasn't just a stranger, it was the woman who had shattered my home. I stood frozen in the middle of the living room, the wallet heavy in my hands as if it carried more than just leather and cards. It carried the truth. My fingers trembled as I flipped through it, one card after another, until I reached her ID. Her name, her picture. Confirmation of the woman I had seen with Carl. It wasn't just a face anymore. It was a person with a life that had collided with mine in the ugliest way. My chest tightened, a mixture of rage and curiosity bubbling inside me. Who was she? Why did she think she could waltz into my home and take what was mine? I felt the sting of humiliation again, but this time it was accompanied by a spark, a dangerous spark. Careless enough to leave her wallet behind, she had practically handed me a thread to pull, and I knew once I started pulling, everything would unravel. I set the wallet down on the table, staring at it like it was daring me to make a choice. I could return it, pretend I hadn't seen it, bury the evidence and wallow in silence, or I could dig into her world, her secrets, her life. My heart pounded as I realized I already knew which option I'd take, because for the first time since that night, I didn't feel powerless anymore. I felt something else. Control. I tucked the wallet into my bag, my pulse racing like I was holding contraband. The silence of the house pressed in, every creak of the floorboard sounding louder than it should. I felt like an intruder in my own home, yet also like a detective on the verge of uncovering something big. My hands were clammy, but my mind was sharper than it had been in days. That wallet was no accident. It was an opening, a crack in the door Carl had slammed in my face. I sat on the edge of the couch, staring at the spot where I'd caught them the night before. Memories from that moment played in my head like a film I couldn't pause. The arrogance in his voice, the way he dismissed me, the smirk that told me he thought he was untouchable. But now, I had something he didn't expect. Proof. A name. A lead. Suddenly, his power over me didn't feel so absolute anymore. I thought about the woman behind that picture, about what she might be hiding. Did she think she was untouchable too? Did she think she could slip in and out of my life without consequence? The questions clawed at me, but underneath them was a strange calm. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. And that shift, from despair to strategy, was the first real breath I'd taken since my world came crashing down. I carried the wallet upstairs, setting it gently on the dresser like it was a treasure map waiting to be read. I opened it again, memorizing every detail, the curve of her smile on the ID photo, the address printed in neat black letters, even the faded receipts tucked behind her credit cards. Each item whispered pieces of her life, and for the first time, she wasn't just the other woman. She was real, tangible, within reach. I felt an odd surge of strength, the kind that comes when pain shifts into purpose. This wasn't just about Carl anymore. It was about her, too. About the arrogance it took to step into my home, to touch what was mine, and then carelessly leave behind the keys to her own world. I wasn't going to throw that chance away. If she thought she could break me, she was about to learn how wrong she was. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind buzzed with possibilities, each one darker than the last. The wallet had given me her name, her face, and a trail I could follow. And I promised myself I would follow it. Because I wasn't done. Not yet. This was only the beginning of a path that would lead me to a discovery even more shocking than the betrayal in my living room. The next morning, I sat with my laptop open, her wallet beside me like a silent accomplice. I typed her name into the search bar, half expecting nothing, half praying for something. And then, there it was, her social media profile. Pictures of her smiling at parties, brunches with friends, vacations by the beach. But what caught my attention wasn't her. It was him. A man by her side in almost every photo, wearing a wedding band. My stomach flipped. She was married. Married. The word hit me like a jolt, snapping me upright in my chair. I clicked through, devouring every post, every tag, until I saw his name. Martin. He looked steady, respectable, an architect according to one of her anniversary posts. My hands trembled, not from weakness this time, but from revelation. She wasn't just betraying me, she was betraying him too. Suddenly, I didn't feel alone anymore. Somewhere out there, Martin was sitting with the same gnawing pain in his chest, probably questioning his worth, his marriage, his life. He didn't know me, and I didn't know him, but in that moment, we were bound by the same wound. And deep inside, I knew. I had to reach out. Not just for answers, for something else. For revenge. I stared at Martin's face on the screen, studying the quiet strength in his eyes, the kind of gaze that said he built things meant to last. How cruel, I thought, that she would betray a man like that. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as doubt tugged at me. Was I crossing a line? But then I remembered Carl's smirk, his venomous words, and the sting in my chest sharpened into resolve. This wasn't crossing a line. This was leveling the field. I drafted a message, rewriting it 3 times before finally hitting send. I kept it short, respectful, but clear. I thought he deserved to know the truth. Then I waited. Minutes stretched like hours, each tick of the clock loud in the silence of the room. When his reply finally came, my breath caught. He didn't lash out or deny it. Instead, he asked to meet, calm, direct, almost relieved that someone else could confirm what he had begun to suspect. The moment we met, there was no awkwardness, just recognition, like we were mirrors of each other's pain. He listened while I spoke, and when it was his turn, I heard the cracks in his voice too. We shared details, piecing together a puzzle of betrayal, each revelation cutting deeper but binding us tighter. And with every word, my anger shifted into something sharper, something with direction. Together, we weren't just victims anymore. We were partners in a story neither of them saw coming. Over coffee, what started as grief began to transform into something else, a dangerous alliance. Martin's calm steadiness anchored my storm, and in return, my fire seemed to light a spark in him. We laughed bitterly at the irony, our spouses sneaking around, convinced they were clever, never imagining their secrets would tie us together. In that moment, revenge stopped being just an idea. It became a plan, unspoken but alive between us. As the days passed, our meetings grew more frequent. At first, it was about strategy, about piecing together their lies, but soon it became about us. We found comfort in each other's company, a balm for wounds we hadn't known how to soothe alone. His hand brushed mine one evening, and instead of pulling away, I let it linger. Our broken hearts, stitched together by betrayal, began to beat in rhythm. I realized then, we weren't just reclaiming our dignity, we were turning the tables. If Carl and his mistress wanted to live shamelessly, flaunting their betrayal, then we would give them a taste of their own cruelty. Side by side, Martin and I became something they never anticipated. United. And deep down, I knew the storm we were about to unleash would shake their world to its core. The night of the trap, my house didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a stage. I lit a single lamp in the corner, its glow spilling over the couch where I had once seen my marriage die. But this time, I wasn't trembling. Martin sat beside me, his presence steady, his arm resting lightly around my shoulders. We weren't there by accident. Every detail of this moment had been chosen, crafted, waiting for its audience. I could almost hear Carl's smug laugh in my head, the same one from that night in the living room. But now, the roles were reversed. He thought he owned the script, thought I'd always be the woman he could crush with a sentence. Tonight, he'd see how wrong he was. Martin and I shared a quick glance, an unspoken promise hanging between us. We weren't just exposing an affair, we were dismantling an illusion. The sound of the front door unlocking made my heart leap, but not with fear, with anticipation. Their laughter floated in before they even stepped inside, so confident, so careless. And then, the door opened wide. Carl walked in with her, his mistress still smiling at something he'd said, until her eyes landed on us. The smile fell. Carl's face drained of color, and that was the moment I knew we had them exactly where we wanted. Carl's jaw tightened, his swagger evaporating as if someone had yanked the ground from under him. "What the hell is this?" he barked, his voice louder than it needed to be, trying to cover his shock. I stayed seated, my back straight, Martin's arm still steady around me. For the first time in years, I felt taller than Carl. I didn't flinch, didn't scramble for words. Instead, I let silence hang in the air, suffocating him. His mistress shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting between me and Martin. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, guilt dripping from every syllable. Martin leaned forward, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Funny, isn't it? You both thought you could play house while tearing ours apart, but here we are, together." The room bristled with tension, their confidence unraveling with every second they stood there. Carl's face twisted into something ugly, anger, fear, desperation all fighting for dominance. He spat insults, tried to make me feel small again, but the words no longer stuck. Not when Martin was beside me, not when I held the truth in my hands. I could feel years of swallowed pain rising to the surface, ready to pour out, and I knew this was my moment to finally turn his arrogance against him. I stood up slowly, forcing Carl to meet my eyes. Do you remember what you told me that night? I asked, my voice steady, almost calm. His face twitched, but I didn't give him the chance to answer. You said I had nothing, that I couldn't leave you, but look at me now, Carl. Do I look like I have nothing? The silence that followed was deafening, and for the first time he had no smug retort. His mistress shrank back, her cheeks flushed red, and Martin's presence beside me only amplified the sting of Carl's downfall. Every word I spoke was a mirror, forcing him to see the cruelty he'd dished out reflected back at him. He tried to laugh it off, to make it seem trivial, but the tremor in his voice betrayed him. The man who once strutted through life convinced of his own power now looked cornered, exposed. And in that charged living room, the same place where he thought he could break me, I unleashed the truth. Years of neglect, his arrogance, his betrayal, all laid bare in front of the woman he'd risked everything for. Their eyes darted, panic rising, but there was no escape. The trap had closed, and it was only the beginning of the collapse that would follow. The fallout came faster than I imagined. By the next week, Martin had filed for divorce, his lawyer armed with evidence that left no room for denial. I watched his mistress's world unravel as she packed her bags from their pristine home, her perfect life shattered in broad daylight. She had thought she could have it all, her husband's reputation, Carl's attention, but instead, she was left with nothing but shame. Carl didn't fare any better. Word spread through his office like wildfire, whispers following him into every meeting, every hallway. The man who once walked with such arrogant pride now dragged himself like a shadow of who he used to be. His mistress abandoned, his reputation in tatters, he no longer looked like the untouchable man who had smirked at me that night. He looked small, broken. And as for me, I didn't shed a single tear this time. I packed my own things, not in frantic handfuls, but carefully, deliberately. Each box sealed was a declaration that I wasn't running anymore. I left that house not as his wife, not as his victim, but as a woman who had taken back her power. And as the door clicked shut behind me, I felt a freedom I hadn't known in years. Martin and I stayed in touch, our bond forged in fire and betrayal. What started as shared pain had become something steadier, something almost comforting. We didn't rush it, we didn't need to. Just knowing there was someone who understood, someone who had stood in the same storm, was enough. Over dinners and long walks, we built something that wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about healing, about choosing a future on our own terms. Carl tried to reach out once, calling late at night with a voice that sounded foreign, shaken, desperate. I let the phone ring until it stopped. For years I had answered every call, every demand, every manipulation, but not anymore. He had gambled everything, certain I couldn't live without him, and now he was the one stranded in the wreckage of his choices. I didn't owe him a single word. There was a quiet satisfaction in watching him fade into the background of my life. He became what he had always feared most, irrelevant. And for me, every step forward with Martin, every smile that wasn't forced, felt like proof that I had survived more than just betrayal. I had survived him. And surviving him was the sweetest revenge of all. Looking back, I realized Carl was right about one thing, when he sneered that I had nothing. For a moment, he almost made me believe it. But what he never understood was that nothing can be rebuilt, reshaped, turned into something stronger. And that's exactly what I did. I took his cruelty, his betrayal, and I forged it into the very weapon that destroyed the empire of lies he had built. He lost everything he thought made him powerful. His wife, his mistress, his reputation, even the illusion of control. And me? I walked away with something far greater than revenge. I walked away with myself. The woman who once trembled in the shadows of his arrogance now stood taller, sharper, untouchable. His downfall wasn't just my justice, it was my rebirth. So when people ask what became of Carl, I simply smile, because the truth is, it doesn't matter anymore. His story ended the moment I decided mine wasn't tied to his. And while he fades into regret, I step forward into a life that's mine alone. He thought I'd never survive without him, but I didn't just survive. I rose. And that, in the end, was the revenge he never saw coming.